Okay, thank you. My name is Anthony Powers. I am the executive director of the American Equity and Justice Group, which is a nonprofit that was created as a neutral zone, so to speak, for the database that you're about to see today. My day job is for the Seattle Clemency Project. And I have lived experience, as seen in the slide leading up to this. I spent 26 years in prison. I was incarcerated at the age of 16. I was, one of those juveniles during the tough on crime period where they said we'd never get any better, never do any good for society. And instead, when I was incarcerated, I was the founder of the Redemption Project, which was a cognitive-based system for helping people to abandon the criminal lifestyle that spread throughout the Washington State prison system. And I mentored over 2,000 people during my incarceration. And I was also a part of the Black Prisoners Caucus. I led the legislative branch of that and did many other things. And I'll pass it off to my wonderful team. Kim?
There we go. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to be a public defender even in high school, and I did that after passing the bar for over a decade before I went to Schrader, Goldmark, and Bender as a criminal defense attorney there. And then I started my own firm, Gordon and Saunders, now 13 years ago. We do misdemeanor, felony, federal criminal defense throughout Washington State. And throughout my time, I've been heavily involved in legislative and policy work. And that led to my appointment to the Sentencing Guidelines Commission by Governor Inslee. And I am serving my third term on that commission. And what always troubled me about the work that I was doing in the legislature or on the commission is that too often our decisions were influenced or guided by anecdote, by what was making the headlines that day. And too little, they were impacted by data, by an understanding of what is happening on the ground and what the real effects of any policy or legal decisions we make may have. Our decisions were driven by anecdote, not by data. And we would talk about this often during the Guidelines Commission. We would wonder, what is the data on a particular subject? And that would lead to a conversation about, well, the data in this place doesn't talk to the data in that place. And our resources are short and our staffing is short. We don't have a good way of really unifying the data in a non-unified court system. And so the conversation would die out. And I have to say that WISIP and our academic institutions are top-notch and very necessary. But the reality is that they cannot keep up with the very real need for timely access to filterable data about what is happening in our criminal justice system. And so since this is a program about access to justice, I want to say one other thing. I was so thrilled when Anthony contacted me with his idea, and I've been even more thrilled as our work has progressed, because I got to tell you, access to justice today and tomorrow, it needs to include the work of the people who were in justice system involved yesterday. They know the system as we cannot, and they overcome obstacles that we have never had to overcome. And you know what? They get the job done. So 4 days after Anthony contacted me, and I told him about all of the problems that the Guidelines Commission came up with when we talked about data-driven decisions. 4 days after that, he contacted me to say, Microsoft is on board and they are excited. And so with that, I am going to turn the microphone over to Kate to talk about her involvement.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, my name is Kate Sigafus, and my day job is as an employment lawyer at Microsoft. So here's the part where I get to say what I'm about to talk about. I am not here on behalf of Microsoft. These are my thoughts, opinions, and perspectives based on past experience. But Microsoft did have a role in this work. So just that little, lawyerly asterisk there. And prior to Microsoft, I was a criminal prosecutor in Kitsap County, Washington for 6 years. And then from there, I transitioned to being on the pro tem judge roster in Kitsap County as well. And just second all of what Kim said, I'll pass this over to Anthony in a moment to sort of share his idea and where this came from and how the process started. But when you're in the trenches in a courtroom every day, you don't get to look up and see what the data is. You don't have that time. You don't have that. And so what we are attempting to create here is just a tool that will allow people to access the data better, right? We are not prophesizing to be experts in this happened, then that happened, and it all must correlate, right? We're here to get the data in the hands of the people that need it. Exactly what we're here to talk about, the access piece. So I'll pass it back over to Anthony to share how this idea came to be.
Thanks, Kate. So the idea actually came to be 4 years ago while I was still incarcerated. I got released in 2019. I had the idea in 2017, and it came about, you talk about access to justice. Inside the prison system, they constantly strip away access to the library, typewriters. I mean, those of us who are old enough to remember what a typewriter was, that's what guys would go up there and have access to typewriters to type up their stuff because you don't have access to computers. And then they took away the typewriters, right? So I would go up there just to help guys do research on their cases because you had a limited amount of time. So I'd go up there and I was good at researching. So I'd go up there and research and try to find comps, not only, cases to help with their appeals, but what does it look like for somebody to get sentenced? And I look at the sentences that people are appealing, and then I start seeing the disparities in it, and I was like, man, I knew there were disparities, but I wanted to be, and this is as a Black person, right? I wanted to be blind to the disparities, and but it was like, man, it's like this is the exact same case, and this person got 90 years, and this person got 20 years, and I started seeing it time and time and time again, right? So then it just made me wonder, like, why with the technology, why if you can have Amazon tell people what type of music they like or what they would be interested in shopping for, why with the technology that we have now, why hasn't anybody come up with a system to utilize technology to eliminate disparities in the criminal justice system, right? And I really would, I wanted to see something that could be created that would ultimately be a tool for people real time to where they can utilize it to eliminate a lot of these disparities because you have the human flaw. And I ended up having my family send me in all kind of studies and everything else. I had a big old stack of studies that I went through, and it would always be a collegiate study for 4 to 6 years, just like the one that led to the death penalty being done away with in Washington State, where they said Black people and people of socioeconomically depressed were 4.5 times more likely to get the death penalty than whites. So it's just simple things like that, but it would take 4 to 6 years. I thought that we could utilize technology to do it in a lot shorter of a time. And that's what the idea originally came from.
So then let's get started talking from the sort of more specifically about the problems that we joined together to solve. And the problem is that inequity is hidden when there aren't tools or research to measure its real-time impact. We know that the US has systemic racial injustice and disproportionality and socioeconomic disproportionality as well. But even though that is no exception in Washington State, and even though Washington State has Microsoft and Google and all of this amazing technological resources, that injustice was still hidden from real-time access in our state. Next slide. Another problem is that the criminal justice data in our state is hard to access in a way that is filterable, in a way that is reliable. And what we think about, or sort of the way my non-technical brain thinks about data, is that it's stored in different silos around the criminal justice system. The courts have some data. The Department of Corrections has some data. The Caseload Forecast Council has data. It's all over the place, but the data is not really accessible to us. It's not able to be filtered, and we can't use it to really make daily decisions. Next slide. Those engaged in the criminal justice system particularly lack visibility into what their peers and their own agencies have been doing. Like Kate said in the introductions, there isn't time most of the time for those of us that are in the courtrooms to be able to understand how the work we're doing in one case may be contributing to or helping reduce inequity and disparity in the system. And that is particularly true for judges. And I can speak with certainty to that because, as you'll hear, we have been talking to a lot of judges around the state about the work we're doing. And one of the things that they tell us is, I don't know how my decisions today fit within all of the decisions that I have made in the past. I think I know, I hope I know, and that I figured it out, but I don't have a way to see that. And I can't see what is going on with the judge, what decisions are being made by the judge in the courtroom next to me, much less a judge across the state. So I don't know how my thinking about what is fair and equitable matches what they are thinking. Next slide. A huge part of the problem in being able to timely filter and access data is that all of the data in these different silos, we can't take the apples in one set of data and easily connect it to the same apples in another set of data. And so even if we can get access to all that data, making it work together and really making the data cross-validate other data, it really wasn't possible. Next slide. We approached this from a sentencing perspective. And that is partly because the absence of data in sentencing, it has an impact for judges. It has an impact for the person being sentenced and their community. It has an impact for prosecutors and for defense attorneys. So across the board, all of us, the purposes of sentencing, they include promoting respect for the law by providing punishment which is just, by providing punishment which is commensurate with the punishment imposed on others committing similar offenses, and in protecting the public. But without this timely access to data, there was no way, again, of really knowing what was considered just in one courtroom or in one case, similar to what was considered just in another. Was the public really being protected, best protected by decisions being made in one case or all of the cases collectively? So this really went to the heart of what sentencing in our Washington state felony system is supposed to do. Next slide. We also knew that since its creation decades ago, Washington's Sentence Reform Act has been changed through the legislative process, but also through court decisions again and again and again and again. And it's not usually changed as a whole, as an entire system, but a piece here and a piece there. What you're seeing on the screen is just one of 8 slides that was created for the Sentencing Guidelines Commission to understand just some of the most prominent sentencing decisions over the existence of the Sentence Reform Act. But there have been many, and every year that the legislature begins its session, there are efforts to affect sentences in a particular case or for a particular crime. To do that again. And so there was no way of evaluating, well, these decisions that were being made by courts or legislators, how does that affect equality? How does that affect justice and disparity on a system-wide basis? So the need was particularly great there as well. Next slide. What the National Institute of Justice wrote in a recent article titled "The Data-Informed Jail." They say that despite the volume of accessible data, most jails do not consistently operate in a data-informed manner and therefore cannot fully leverage the power of data to support decision-making, inform policies, and improve both operations and outcomes. So in addition to what is happening in the courtroom at sentencing, those decisions that are being made there isn't the ability to look at data and access it to then influence what happens after, to again make sure that what is being done on a daily or a systemic basis improves equity and justice and safety. Next slide. And this last July was a statement in a letter issued by the King County DPAA Equity and Justice Work Group to the King County prosecutor. And I am not putting this up here to throw the King County Prosecutor's Office under the bus or to call them out in a bad way, rather the opposite. Because what the work group, which is a collection of some of the less senior prosecuting attorneys in that office, they belonged, what that work group said is the collection, analysis, and dissemination of accurate case data is critical to diagnosing the problem of implicit bias. So we have judges in the courtroom, attorneys and prosecutors in the courtroom, those in corrections, what happens after the courtroom, and then those that are making the charging and the plea decisions. All of them are recognizing the importance of data in both daily decisions and systemic equity. Next slide. This past December, the Washington State Criminal Sentencing Task Force issued its 2020 report. And this is sort of near and dear to my heart because the Sentencing Guidelines Commission was tasked with looking at the Sentence Reform Act and making suggestions for changes to improve justice, to simplify it, and to improve equity. And where the Sentencing Guidelines Commission left off, the Criminal Sentencing Task Force picked up. And they are now in the process of, for the first time really since the guidelines were created, they are looking at what changes need to be made to felony sentencing to accomplish these goals. And one of the things that the State Criminal Sentencing Task Force said in their December 2020 report is that work remains towards the goal of reducing racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and geographic disparities in adult felony sentencing. So we know that the drive for systemic equity, it is always going to be ongoing. We aren't going to get to the point where we can say it is done. And we certainly aren't there right now because we haven't had the tools that help us do it. Next slide. One last point before I hand the microphone to Kate, and that is for those of you that are unfamiliar with the state felony sentencing grid, this is what it looks like. And we're going to refer to parts of this later on in our presentation. So what's important to know is that on the vertical columns, it looks at the seriousness level of the offense, that the person being sentenced is being sentenced for. On the top, it considers the offender score, which is an individual's current or past criminal history. And in a lot of ways, determining someone's standard range sentence, meaning what a judge is generally required to sentence someone to, is then determined by the intersection of those two axes. So it's a mathematical question. It's not a question of what is fair or what is just. And so part of what the Criminal Sentencing Task Force is looking at is to what extent is this driving inequity and disparity in our system? So knowing that these are the problems, and these are the problems that are being considered across the system, I want to have Kate pick up and talk to you about how we approached it.
Thanks, Kim, and happy to take over at this point. I'll share my screen in a minute to let you see this mythical tool we've been talking about here, but just a little background on how it got to Microsoft and how it got to my computer screen. Anthony mentioned that he had, collected this data over time, and he was actually presenting at Microsoft on behalf of the Clemency Project and doing a training for us as pro bono attorneys to help out with clemency matters. And ever vigilant Anthony mentioned that he had this pile of data, and Jacqueline Crones, who is a member of the American Equity Justice Group board, was attending that training. She's part of our responsible AI team. And she said, hey, I heard you have data. Let's talk about that. The two of them got together, and it was around this time last year, actually a little over a year ago. It just so happened coincided with a July of 2020, which is when Microsoft has its annual hackathon project. So for those of you not familiar, every year Microsoft sort of says, hey, let's take a week. If you want to join teams, you can join teams. What kind of problems are out there that we can help with? We're not going to solve, all the world's problems, but if you have a thing, let's see what we can do. I think one of the more notable things that has come from the hackathon projects is you might have seen the Xbox has an accessible controller. There's lots of Super Bowl advertisements for it every year. That came out of a hack, right? It's let's bring these people together and let's see what we can do. And so Anthony walked in on a Monday with his pile of paperwork, and I believe on Wednesday or Thursday of that week, we got access to the CFC data, the caseload forecast data. And we built this little tool in a week, and we've been tweaking it and changing it over time. So there's a lot of people involved in this, but that's how Microsoft got involved. Since then, as Anthony mentioned, it's turned into an entire nonprofit with lots of people volunteering and helping, and us connecting with people from all over the country to work on this. But that's just a little background on how it got started. So I'm going to take over now and start sharing my screen of our tool, the Public Equity and Justice System. As I go along, I'm going to try and monitor questions, but I'm a little dual attention here. So This is our first page, and this is really just the mission and the background, some basic definitions for individuals who might be using this tool. We always get the question on, is this available to the public? It's not yet. That's why I have to be here to show it. It's still in Microsoft systems. We're in the process of transferring that out. But really, as Kim has said, the mission of this project is to use technology to try to bring equity and accountability to the criminal justice system. So just some basic descriptions of things. And it also talks about our data sources. So there's two sources for the data we have right now. The caseload forecast data. So the past 20 years of adult felony sentencing data. So adult only, right? We don't have juvenile. Felony, we don't have, misdemeanors included, and it's sentencing only, right? So we don't have access to what things were referred to a prosecutor's office as, or what things were booked as in a jail. So that's what we have right now. It goes from 1999 to 2019. It's uploaded. There's a new issue every year. We do have the 2020 data, but we're waiting to hold until this item gets released, and it takes down the website for a few days, and we put in the new info. And then the Washington census population, that's also included here, and it's overlaid in certain portions. So the next tab is really a how to use this, some example use cases, some definitions, some metrics, and really importantly are things to know about the dashboard. For example, the data we have so far in terms of enhancements, it only has a couple. It doesn't include a firearm enhancement, which is something that people might want at some point, right? Like that would be helpful to know, is how firearm enhancements are applied to cases. But right now we just don't have that in the data we have. Also, pro tem judges aren't included in here. Inmate cost is a fixed sort of number on our screens based on 2019 data. As we change things, that will definitely change. Outlier cases have also been filtered, and I'll show you that in a moment. So here's the first big section, and this is about disproportionality. So what we have here, the data you're looking at, is the caseload forecast data and the census data combined into one place. So I'm going to take you sort of down the side and then over to the right as we go through this. The total number of cases right now, if you look over here, there's different racial demographics over here, and right now African American is what's checked. So the total number of cases, we're only in the year 2019, and we've got all counties in Washington state and genders as identified. A couple things to call out here. You might notice there's no Latinx designation. That's because the census data doesn't include it in a way that we can use here. So right now it goes into other. Once we pull that census data out, and we're only using the caseload forecast data, then we have Latinx as well. But right now, because of the way census data is collected, it goes in other. So total number of cases for that year, that race, total population, and then the disproportionality ratio. And what this is in the easiest way to say this is what you're hoping for is a 1, right? You're hoping that the percentage of individuals convicted in a particular race fairly closely mirrors the percentage of the population, right? And there's not some big disproportionality. So if those were entirely equal, your number would be 1. If they're not, up and down, that's what you see by the disproportionality. As I mentioned, the individual cost per year, that's just a fixed number. It doesn't change via, as we change through races. It's just based on the 2019 information. So let's move to here. This is percentage of convictions and percentage of population based on race. So light gray is the population, dark gray is the conviction percentage. And so as you can see, as it goes across races, here's what we're looking at in all the counties in Washington in 2019. If we go over here, we've broken that out further by gender. So since we are in the African American tab, you can see that the split between males and females and what that looks like. So what you're seeing here is, here's the light pink percentage of the population. That's going to be what this light gray is over here. Obviously, as you add them, it tweaks a little bit, but you'll see as we scroll through the various races that the light pink will be around 79% for white individuals. It's around 4. It varies based on gender over here just because of the split. And then the percentage of Black males versus Black females and what that sentencing and conviction information is. As we move down to this, this is my favorite little chart over here. This polls, you can pick any 5 counties you want. So you can come over to the search tab and you can pick 5 if you're based somewhere and you want to know what's around you. You can do that, absolutely. The way it polls automatically is by the 5 most populous given that race. So because African American is selected, you're going to see these 5 counties because they have the highest population of African Americans in the state. And what you're looking at is this ratio over time. And so you can see, are we moving down towards this one line? Are we moving up? What happened? You know, we don't, like I said, we don't have an answer to what happened in the year, 2008 in Spokane County, but at least you know something might have happened and you have a place to look versus just arbitrarily, scrolling through years.
And Kate, if I can jump in.
Yes, please.
I also love the disproportionality ratio trend, because going back to the idea that every year our legislature or our courts are making decisions that change how we sentence, at least to that extent, when there is a change that when we can compare what's happening in the disproportionality ratio trend to what was happening historically, that may help us get some answers about the impact that a certain decision had.
Thanks for that. All right, and so then disproportionality details. This is where we can sort of sort by percentage. So if you click on this, my computer's running a little slower, but you can see they sort by percentage up and down, disproportionality ratio. You can do the same by convictions. If you actually go into these, you see the individual counties as they open up. And then if you go into the counties, it's broken down by gender again. So what we can do here is let's stick in 2019 in all the counties. What you're going to see is I switched to Asian as the race. You can see these counties changed again, and that's what I referenced, which is because these are the most voluminous. Again, you can go in and you can select your counties individually. So and set them how you want to set them. I'm going to unselect and let's just do Spokane County. We'll go east on this little journey here. And here's Spokane County. We could go back to 2011 and you can see this is what it looked like. Let's do, we'll do white in 2011 in Spokane County. And here's what the disproportionality looks like. You can see that's below 1, right? So that means those 2 bar graphs don't quite align. And then let's see what happens over time. Obviously, this one's not going to change, right? Like we see the trend, but here's where you can get into the more specifics about what was happening, how many cases there were, all that kind of thing. Let's go open this up again and let's add another county. So now we can let's add King and let's add Clallam. We'll just add a couple here. So now you have all 3 here. You can see what's going on over time in these places. Again, I don't know what happened here and in 2009, and I don't know what happened in 2010, but at least something happened, right? And there's something to look at. And so that's just one way we can use this tool. All right, so I'm going to reset it all to make it all fresh so we don't have anything selected as we move on to the next tab, which is sentencing disparity.
And Kate, as we get started, I'm going to just make a shout out to people. After we present the whole tool, we're hoping to have time so that we can do some other sample searches for you. And so I'm going to be having you think about that. And as time allows, if you put those searches that you'd like us to do into the chat, we're going to try and get to them.
All right. So let's move on to the sentencing disparity. There's 2 tabs for this one. This is our first sort of county and judge tab. So what you have here again, we'll go down the slide, total number of cases. And this is where we have to talk about that sentencing grid that Kim showed you just before I started. So as she said, there's offender score on the horizontal, and there's seriousness level of the crime on the vertical. And that's what an individual who is sentencing a person is looking at, a person on the bench. And so, for example, to describe what this percentage means, this 0 to 100%, is, let's say your offender score is 3 and the seriousness level of the crime is 3. If you do that in the little grid and you hit the box, it says the sentencing range is 9 to 12 months. So outside of other factors, 9 to 12 months is what is available to for a judge to sentence an individual in. So 50% of that would be 10.5 months. It's the midpoint of that specific range, okay? And so when we're looking at average sentence range, what we're talking about is 50% would be hitting that 10.5 month mark. So because we have a sentencing grid in Washington, that's sort of how you have to think about this. Obviously, as we plan to extend in other places that don't have sentencing grids like this, it changes a little bit, but that's what we're talking about. And so when you see the number of cases that are in that sentencing range of the upper end of the sort of available sentencing range, this is the number of cases. And then we have the 2019 average range, the average overall, and then the median. And this can actually be kind of interesting based on race, the median. So, as you think of all the numbers, the median's like the one in the middle, not the average. And so that's a little bit interesting to look at as well. So what we can talk about here is this first section. So average sentencing range by county. Again, this pulls up your 3 most populous. You can select any counties you want and have them stay here. You can bookmark them, all of that. And so what we're seeing is King County, the average sentencing range for African Americans is 37%, Asian, Latinx, Native American, and white along these trends, and then various counties. We then have this by judge. Again, this is just the way the data sort of pulls this. You can put in, the judges in your bench, or, however you want to do it over here. But there's all sorts of different data you can get that way. When you come down here to the individual judges, if you click on this to open it, it just lists the counties where they have been on the bench before and issued sentences. So most of these will have, their county that they were elected in, or things like that. Also, as you go along this, what we have here, you have, the specific number of cases, and then the sentencing range based on race. You can scroll across and see all of those. Some things to call out is when a number is under 20, so the number of cases is small, right? So if you had one really horrible case, and that was it, and your range looks off, we call those out in red font across here if it's under 20. Again, happy to work with people as we sort of look at this data, but that's how we flagged it so far, is 20 or under. You get that red number to sort of alert, like, hey, this is a little low, to consider an average or things like that. So you can also click on these just overall, and it'll pull it out in a little different visual, right? So if you just click on this African American vertical here, it changes the case number. It pulls it all for you. Same for Asian, right? You're going to see this just change as I go across, just to help you, as you're using this tool, see what you want to see without having to do research every time. Again, all the counties are here. One thing we have in here, if I pull this out, is what the crimes are, right? And this can get pretty extensive because of the way the data comes into us. If there was one violent offense plus a felony traffic offense, it's one category. If it was a violent offense plus a traffic offense and a sex offense, it all adds up, right? Those are each treated differently. So, but this was incredibly helpful when the Blake decision came about, and I know Kim will talk about that later. Another way you can filter this is by year. And so let's say I'm an elected prosecutor and I want to know what was going on before I got in office and after, right? You can sort this way. You could do it based on, when a legislation was passed. Again, you can sort of see these details that way. So the next tab is one we call sort of the deep, oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to show you something else because this was something I was playing with this recently. If I open county, and so, you know, I was just in a meeting before this and they were like, well, does it mean we need to layer legislation over all of this? And I was saying, you know, there's a lot of reasons why these numbers can look the way they look. We're not, you know, we're not attempting to sort of answer any major questions here, just provide the data in a usable format. And so I was telling them, I pulled my old county, Kitsap County, and I was just interested in seeing, you know, what this was, what numbers looked like. And I was like, wow, the average sentencing range for Judge Roof for African Americans was high. And again, you wouldn't know this, which is why it's important that we have all these pieces in here, Judge Roof, from its inception until his retirement, was the presiding judge over the diversion court, over our drug court. And so when somebody typically enters a drug court program, if they succeed, the cases gets dismissed. But if they fail in that program, they've already agreed to that higher end of the sentence, right? It's part of the diversion. And so there are factors like that that go into the data. And so, you know, there's more work to be done here in terms of like, well, but at least, you know, there's a place to look, right? Like that's what we're trying to provide, is that place to have at least start a conversation about some of this. There is a question about average sentencing range as a percentage of what. Let me touch on that again, because again, in Washington State, it's interesting, right? Like you want 50% to just be the average of all the things, right? Like that would make sense. But the way we've been able to do it to compare apples to apples is there's the sentencing grid, right? There's the vertical that we saw with the level of the crime, and then there is the horizontal with the offender score. And within that, when those two lines meet, for example, offender score 3, seriousness level of the crime is 3, a judge is given this sentencing grid and they say you can sentence more or less between 9 months and 12 months. So 50% of that specific range is going to be 10.5 months. So that's what that percentage is for the individual that asked. Hopefully that clarifies, because again, it takes a minute to think through that one. All right, and so now what we have is, we call this sort of the deep dive page here. And a lot of the same information as the last one, but just pulled out a little bit differently for different visuals. And what it includes is some of what we were just talking about, which is the seriousness level and the offender score. So again, total number of cases, a lot of this is similar as we, you know, sort. But here where we have broken out is by age, right? And so age groups for these various things, because that might be interesting. Quickly, there's a question in the chat about LFOs imposed. I actually have a meeting later today about LFOs and the tool on that. So it does not include LFOs. I'm sorry, and for those who don't know, that's legal financial obligations. So when a person is sentenced to a crime, there are certain financial, based on legislature and then based on other factors, there's certain monies they have to pay and may have to pay. And so calculating that is part of this. It's not in this tool right now, but it's definitely something that is being worked on as well. So back to age. So let's say, you know, this is broken out again. We've got various races here. And one way you can use this tool is, let's say I just want to focus on people 26 to 35. I can click on this bar, right, which is African American, and it'll pull it up here. It changes all the case number. It sorts it all for you on the side, but then shows you with respect to the median sentencing range, what we have, and it pulls it all, you know, with seriousness level, offender score, it narrows it all down for you. And you can just sort of sort through all of this, and it will do the same for all. So again, you're seeing, is there a difference by age group, right, and race as you combine that all? Let's see. So the other piece, let me unselect you there. Over here we have the average sentencing range by race and then by seriousness level of the crime. And much like we had this space where anything 20 and under, if there were 20 or under cases, was sort of flagged, here we flagged if it's 50% or more. So right, that would be that middle point between, using our 9 to 12 month range again, that 10.5 month point, is it at that and higher? And you know, it's just interesting to see, like, who knows if there's anything here, right? But you can see as seriousness level of the crime gets higher, there are many more individuals that are sentenced to the higher end of the crime. And that's something I know, Kim, you might want to comment on this, but as the Sentencing Guideline Commission comes up with their numbers, right, in theory, the seriousness level of the crime and the offender score, they already have all of that sorted out, right? And so are people ending up on the top end, despite the Sentencing Guidelines Commission sort of having facts or not? Kim, I don't know if you want to add anything to that before I move on.
Yeah, in fact, as we were putting this tool together and then making modifications since the hackathon, we have added the average sentence range by seriousness level and offender score, partly because of the Guideline Commission and Criminal Sentencing Task Force's need or desire to look at sentencing based on where someone falls on the sentencing grid. Because what we do know and what we can easily access is how many people are sentenced on a year or ever for crimes in each place on the grid. But we weren't able to look and see where the disparity is the greatest or where the sentences compared to the average, where the sentences are the harshest. And so this was a specific request, and we loved that feedback and included it here.
And also love the feedback in the chat. We all, we want this to be a useful tool. And so if people have the common questions, LFOs for sure is usually one, please keep them coming. Oh, go ahead.
Kate, speaking of that, I wanted to mention a couple things. There was a question about therapeutic courts or courts that have sentencing alternatives. And so we can talk about that more in a minute, but one of the things that those that are interested in what is the impact of different therapeutic courts in different jurisdictions, what impact does that have? What you're going to be able to do is cross-reference any information you can get about the creation or the use of those therapeutic courts in that jurisdiction or any alternatives to sentencing. You're going to be able to take that information that you can find and then look at the trends. And by cross-referencing that, at least for now, that's probably the best way to get a sense of what impact are those alternatives really having on felony sentences. And then, Kate, as you're doing a demo, I know we had one question in here about youth in adult courts, meaning those who are under 18 who are sentenced as adults. And that is data that we have here. And so as we're showing how this can be used, maybe you can use that as an example.
Yeah, happy to. And right here, I can just sort of click through. Here, we've broken it out into the 16 to 18, age group, and we can sort by race and do all of that. It's already in here instead of breaking it down, but this is one part of that, right? Again, filtering it however you want to filter it by county, by all those factors. But yeah, we do have that piece broken out specifically. And then I'm just going to touch on this offender score. Really similarly to the seriousness level is sorting this by offender score, right? And, as you move up, people are, higher end. We got some large numbers in here, y'all, don't worry. We've got it all factored in here. And so this is just to show you that we do include all the data here. This is just, another way to see and sort what we have. I
just want to add something. When it comes to the Domingo Cornelio Ali decision, we utilized this database already to gather all the names, and then Seattle Clemency shot out letters to everybody who was still incarcerated in the prison system to let them know they're eligible, and then to ask who has an attorney and get an attorney for those who couldn't get one.
Yeah, and I want to, Anthony brings up a good point, and that is the use of names in this. What you all should know is that the data we get is going to have names in it. So we're going to know as an organization what names go with this data, what the public is going to be able to see without contacting us directly and entering into an appropriate data use agreement. What the public will be able to see does not have names or those personal identifiers connected to it. And so what we really wanted to do is the most good and the least harm. We don't want to create another website where a potential employer or an apartment manager can go to find that someone has criminal history. But what we want to do is make it possible to validate the information that we are showing by providing court case numbers that can then be used to follow up and get names.
And that's a perfect segue. So the anonymous, what those names are you're seeing are the judge names. And so that's public record information. Those are the names on the sentencing documents by individual judges. And so that's what that is. You can see that category. It's not the individuals. It's not the individual defendants' names. But that is a great segue, Kim, into this last tab, which is the case drill down tab. Again, a lot of the same information we've seen just shown in different ways. And then also, down to cause numbers of individual matters. As an example, I ran through this with an individual on the bench who I'm friends with and just pulled up their metrics, right? We were like, hey, let's look. And there was a number that was high in a certain, race. And he was like, well, let's look at that. And we went into the data, we sorted it. And he was like, oh, I remember that one. Like that was, that was a person who had been a countrywide elder abuse, sort of taking advantage of elderly people. Like it was a really, really big, a big case. And so he was like, I stand by that completely, but it was seeing where that came from and being able to say the yes or the no's. And that's why we have this included. This doesn't take you to a link. This doesn't take you to like the court documents or anything like that. It just indicates the individual matters. And so as we scroll across, there's a lot more information in here. And, we have sort of sat down and said, what could these be? What could they not be given the data we have? And so these are some that we've chosen to show. What was the person's offender score? What were the crimes? What kind of categories were they? What was, the highest seriousness level? It goes on and on. If there's enhancements with the limitations I mentioned, just various data points that we've included along the way in this case. Yeah.
This also connects to the question that we had about sentence alternatives and therapeutic courts. So there are some sentence alternatives, such as a first-time offender waiver or a SOSA or a DOSA, that may already be apparent, or you can find it in our data. Others are going to have to be built in as we get access to other silos of data.
Yeah. And so what you have again here is just, age, race, year, various pieces. And what we have added in here, and we're always tweaking ways to make this better. We had a meeting with the CDO at Microsoft earlier today about ways to tell the story with data and what we want to share. One thing in here we have is verdict, right? And so you can sort of see, well, if there was a bench trial, which might include a lot of your it might include a lot of certain types of matters. If it was a jury trial or if it was a plea, there's all those sort of options you can sort through to see, what is the impact, if any, of, the nature of the resolution, whether it was a plea, a trial, a jury trial, or a bench trial. So that is the database as a whole. I'm happy to take, if we have one example, we probably have time to let's do maybe one that was in the comments, and then we'll finish up our presentation, and then we'll have hopefully time for more a little bit later. Is there one, Kim, you could read to me, or Anthony?
Well, I think that we have been keeping up with the comments. Okay. So I'll make an ask. Is there a judge or a former Superior Court judge who is a part of the audience that is willing to have us use them for a search?
Kim went bold, you guys. I like it. Or, county as well. Like if you lived somewhere, like there's all sorts of ways to do this. But we're happy to do that. And if no one has a specific one, we can move on and then circle back with that at the end to make sure we have time for everyone's questions and all of that. I'm seeing some pop in. I can't get around fast enough. Okay, there's a Whatcom County in general. We can show that for sure. Let's see. All right, so if we go Whatcom County, sentencing disparities, and let's do disproportionality in Whatcom County. And so as you can see, once you selected a county, it sticks through all of them until you reset it. And so here's what we're looking at. You can see, actually open this up. Let's unselect all Whatcom. And this is what it looks like for Whatcom County over the years. We can sort of see how many cases and various people, places, genders, all of that. We can go to this. I have been doing the math on these, pulling up the census data, and it does add up every single time I do it. So that's good to know. But yeah, there's one for you. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now. I just want to make sure we get to all the parts of this. So let me stop sharing now, and then we'll turn it back over.
And I think there was one raised hand.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Let's take that question before we finish up with our slides. And Shanti, do we need your help to give the floor to the person who has raised her hand?
I have given mic rights to Janet. Janet, if you're able to unmute, you can ask your question directly, or you can type your question into the group chat or Q&A. But you should be able to unmute on your end if you'd like to ask your question now. Okay, we can go back if needed.
Okay, great. So then Shanti or Rex, if you could start the PowerPoint again to the next slide. So in this slide, I wanted to recognize some of the criminal justice system and Microsoft volunteers who have played a role in making this tool a reality so far. And when you look at how voluminous the number of volunteers from Microsoft is, it really bowls me over. We have people from across all of the different divisions at Microsoft, whether they are attorneys, they are data scientists, they are website experts, they are marketers or project managers. So the support that we've had is really holistic. And I think that's one of the things that it makes this a reality. So we want to thank them. Next slide. This was sort of a preview to the demo of the tool, which just shows that we are combining that CFC data, the Caseload Forecast Council data, with the census data to then make the tool in its current form. Now, as we get access to other silos of data, you're going to see that there are more sources that are going into the tool. Next slide. And I think sort of this goes without saying right now, this was the solution that we came up with as during the hackathon. This is the public equity and justice system that is now becoming a reality through the American Equity and Justice Group. I'm going to have you skip the next slide and go to the one beyond that. Here we go. We're talking about I've mentioned before how there's other silos of data out there. Since we had the hackathon over a year ago, we have not just sat on our hands. We have been presenting to legislators, to prosecutors, to judges, to the Office of Public Defense and other public defenders, to academics, to the media, all across government, and to members of the public. And so what we have found through our presentations is really sort of across the board enthusiasm for this. And that told us that we're on the right track. We've particularly had enthusiasm from judges who, Judge Schaefer, when we first presented this to the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, she said, I have sentencings this afternoon, so when can I have this on my computer? Prosecutors have been interested, and we are now working with a prosecutor's office to access their data and to use that as our first step to including prosecutor data in our tool. So right now, what you're seeing is fairly judge-centric. It is focused on, in many ways, the decisions that are made by judges. But judges are not the only people that have discretion in the system. In fact, the discretion that prosecutors have is far and away greater than most judges have at a sentencing hearing. And so we are very cognizant of the need to build in ways to make prosecutor decisions transparent. And the same goes with defense lawyers. I know that what I can do for a case is different as a public defender than given the time and resources I have as a private attorney. I know there are incredible public defenders out there that do things I never thought of. And I know there are private attorneys out there that I think should not be doing criminal defense. And so the role that the defense lawyer has is going to be equally important. We are looking at getting data from corrections. We have begun the early stages of conversations with tribal courts, with courts of limited jurisdiction. And we have then been talking to legal aid organizations to try to get more access to the data that we know is all a part of the effects of criminal justice system involvement, whether it's on housing or education or income, all of those things, mortality. We want to see what we can do to give you a holistic tool. Then what we have in here is other states, because what we're doing here is not just a benefit to Washington, but it is generating some interest. And so I will have you move to the next slide. Late last year, there was an article in the Atlantic that was written by a court of appeals and a Supreme Court justice from Ohio. And we have been meeting with them and talking with them since this article was published. And in fact, I first heard them when they were interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air. Their theory was how a spreadsheet could change the criminal justice system. And this article is in your materials because I think that they are articulating a lot of what we believe, which is that a spreadsheet, access to data, is going to change our criminal justice system conversations and the system itself. Next slide. Following the Atlantic article, there was an article written by the risk management, and I apologize, I see I misspelled it on my slide, the risk management director at Washington, DOC. Now, she was writing as a private individual, but her insight and her what she pointed out is no less valuable. A system could guide courts, prosecutors, and defense attorneys in their sentencing decisions, and then reduce or even eliminate sentencing errors. Well, the same goes for sentencing disparity. And so we're really looking forward to collaborating with DOC to access their data in the future. Next slide, please. Earlier this year, the State v. Blake decision was issued by the Supreme Court, and that ruled that felony drug possession prosecutions in Washington State were unconstitutional. And Chief Justice Deborah Stevens, in her partial concurrence, she noted the fact of racial and ethnic disproportionality in our criminal justice system is indisputable. Well, this was really a game-changing decision for the criminal justice system. And after that, judges, court systems, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the individuals affected were all scrambling to figure out what cases are impacted, where are those cases, how can we help them, and what help do they need? So what we were able to do in a very short period of time is filter the data in our system to provide a list by county of all of the case numbers that include a felony drug conviction between the years 1999 and 2019. We were then able to provide that information to the Office of Public Defense, to the legislators. They've also obtained that information, at least some of that, from the Department of Corrections, so that people can quickly begin to identify how to remedy this decades-long injustice. Now, one of the other things that we were able to do is filter that data by race. And then when we provided that filtered data to legislators, to the public, it resulted in media attention. Next slide. This is the link to the Strangers article. Their headline, "New Data Analysis Shows the Astonishing Breadth of the Racial Disparity in Washington's Drug Possession Convictions." We are thrilled that in a very short time, you see this was dated March 17th. The decision from the Supreme Court came at the end of February. In a very short time, we're able to filter our data, make it available, and it gets out to the media's attention and ultimately to the public. So we have made some tweaks and some adjustments to the analysis and the numbers that go with this article, but you can, I've got the link to this in the materials and on the screen here, you can go and see what the analysis was and what the numbers were that we had at that time. This is the sort of thing that we are hoping that when you as members of the public, when members of our government commissions or the legislature or courts or prosecutors, when you all have questions about what does the data show, you're going to be able to get the data to make analyses like this yourself. Next slide. These next two slides that are in the materials that go with us, and I'll have you flip to the next one as well. These are different ways that an intern who is working with the Washington Defender Association, I want to give him a shout out. I've identified him by name on the slide, the bottom of the slide, Robin, and I'm going to get his name wrong because I can't read the name on my screen. It's too small. But this is how he chose to use the Blake data to then demonstrate the disproportionality and where that specifically is. Next slide. So when we did the hackathon, the data was living at Microsoft, and it was primarily Microsoft volunteers that had access to the tool. So now what is happening is the American Equity and Justice Group has been created. Our 501c3 status is pending. The tool and all of the data and future data has been migrated over to American Equity. Next slide. I want to give a shout out to the founding board of directors for American Equity. This shows you how serious we are. Our board of directors includes Microsoft, former prosecutor, Columbia Legal Services, Intel Corporation, former director of the Center for Court Innovation, Amazon, and the Washington Defender Association. And when I say people from Microsoft, I mean like Jacqueline Crones, who's the director of responsible artificial intelligence for Microsoft. So during early meetings, when I told them, do you know how messy some of the data is that's on anything that's filed in a court? It's written in my handwriting, and that is hard to read. And she's like, yeah. And we are Microsoft. And I'm excited to show off our AI capabilities. So when I say that there are obstacles to this, and that Anthony has brought together the people that aren't pausing at those obstacles, but are taking them on, I really mean it. Next slide. The support that we are getting from beyond Microsoft is also pretty amazing. We have Azure sponsorship, which is going to enable us to make our website and the tool available through the Microsoft Justice Reform Initiative. We have pro bono assistance from Davis Wright Tremaine and Perkins Coie. And as Kate mentioned, she just got out of a meeting because we are collaborating with Microsoft's chief data officer. And he's like, he is a big guy at Microsoft. And I was a little taken aback at his interest. But you know what happened at the very first meeting with him is he said, has there ever been a hackathon tool or a hackathon project that has turned into a nonprofit? Oh yeah. Mine was the first one. So American Equity, ours is the second. And we're really excited about what the future will bring. Next slide. We have, as I mentioned, we've been making presentations to legislative stakeholders, courts, judges, policy and advocacy groups, and then beyond Washington. We've been in talks with Ohio. Ohio introduced us to Michigan. We've now been introduced to Colorado, to legal and advocacy groups in Oregon and Maryland. We've been working with NYU, Harvard, and USC. So we are really accessing some of the brightest minds around the country who are thinking about this problem, can advise us. And we're also going to be looking to them and to all of you for support, because it really is going to take all of us to make sure that if there is data that is important to understanding disparity, that we find a way to access it and to make it useful. Last slide, next slide. There have been a lot of questions about where can, if you could go back one more slide. Yeah, there's been a lot of questions about when can I access this? Is this available? Yes, you are going to be able to access this because we are very much in the process of getting ready to launch our website. And when that happens, we're not going to keep it a secret. So if you yourself want to be informed about the launch of our website, send the contact. We've put it in the chat again. And finally, then the location of our future website on the last slide.
Thank you, everyone. Perfect timing.
Thank you all. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kate, Kim, and Anthony.